Suppose you have a supercomputer that knows everything about everything. Every particle accounted for, every species and individual that could possibly come into existence, every single experience that can be produced by every single possible course of action. This supercomputer's goal is to maximize well-being in the utilitarian manner, so it weighs your individual well-being against the collective, against some future collective, future individuals, and it determines what you should do. You have certain human impulses, like the desire for freedom, free speech, a loving partner, the desire to keep all your limbs, and so on. Then there are less intuitive possibilities, like chaining yourself to a desk to earn more money, suppressing free speech to live in a place like Singapore, remaining celibate to pursue philosophy, cutting off a limb to become YouTube famous, and so on. So, the supercomputer calculates all of these and knows what is absolutely best. In this first situation we're going to look at, you are going to be faced with a choice that is not terribly tough, but does run against your immediate selfish desires, but that you know may be preferable in the long run, perhaps for a greater number of people. Note that there are other categories of action the computer may be aware of, such as quote-unquote choices you're perhaps physically or materially capable of embracing, but not able mentally to consider due to the limited structure or awareness of your mind at this point, but things that the supercomputer knows would be better in the long run. It's also worth noting here that there could be many times individual impulse and supercomputer certainty coincide, but for different reasons. Like you want to exercise every day to look hot, while supercomputer knows that will make you live longer, encourage those around you, contribute more to society before you die. Whatever we choose for the right reason or the wrong reason, it creates this cascading effect on the structure of our minds and broader structure of society, the societal mind, whatever, which also must be calculated. Supercomputer knows all of this. Now on this fine evening, you're paying for dinner at your local restaurant, considering the tip size, and you see a donation jar with one of those little flyers advertising a local child with leukemia. Your tipping decision just became a touch more difficult. Your meal was $20 and you have an even 10 left over. You were sort of feeling generous and considering leaving a $10 tip. Suddenly though, you'll have to break it or maybe pay with the card if you want to also donate to the child. Maybe the cashier sees you looking at the donation jar, at the sweet photo of this sweet smiling child, hairless and frail from chemotherapy. You suppose you could pay for the meal with card and just choose one of those automated tipping options that are so annoying nowadays, with the cashier sort of looming on the other side of the screen and pretending oblivion. But if you pay with card, then you'll be left once again with the choice to leave an unbroken 10 in the leukemia jar or ask for change to give less to be more miserly, which is sort of a giant hassle, makes you feel bad, and now there's someone waiting just behind you, and the restaurant is short-staffed, and there's a football game on, and you were meant to watch it with your brother who's visiting. Your time with him is precious, and he'll be waiting for you to let him in at home. He's actually just sitting on the porch. He doesn't have a key. Oh dear. Okay, I made this a bit more complicated than it needs to be for this, but far less complicated than real life. For now, we can just consider that one single child to donate or to breeze on with your day. Fortunately, we have our utilitarian supercomputer, and it's been chugging at full steam. It's embedded in our brain. Maybe it wasn't there at the Big Bang. It's not a god in this experiment, but it's smart enough to trace back every single particle, every single photon, to map every single field as it fluctuates through space. And it's been tracking perfectly the progress of these things all across every timeline, every frame of reference, up until this very moment. It has no sense of progress, really, of course, not in the way you do, because it sort of encompasses everything. So it sees all the causal threads. So cause and effect are locked together, evident, made manifest, patterns encoded in its endless ticking voltages, and there's no uncertainty of the future, no fadedness of the past. Everything to the computer has the same ongoing quality of voltage or void, presence or absence, a mind-boggling web of interconnected actions that are just ones or zeros, quantities of well-being. And this supercomputer communicates by an app, which you happen to have downloaded. It communicates via this little, say, bone conduction. Yeah, okay, it's not in your brain. It's a bone conduction implant just in front of your ear. Nowadays, Elon Musk's 50th Neuralink iteration has taken off. Lots of people use brain-to-computer interfaces directly. They're more sleek and the surgery is all in one. You're old school, though, and you prefer your enhancements to be removable. You're still a cyborg, as all of us are, who use these crazy machines that change the way we think and interface and communicate and experience, but you're just pretentious about it. So quickly you flick your attention towards the computer in your mind, you summon it to wakefulness with your mental command. There's a moment of kind of garbled uncertainty as you scramble for a question to phrase it, but you realize how smart it is. It already knows what's going on, of course. What should I do? You ask. It's already tracked you until now. It doesn't actually need to hear the question. It already knows what it will tell you to make you feel certain ways, to choose the best option. It already knows what you will choose. The verbal cues are more of a gesture on the programmer's part to make the experience feel more human, less intrusive. So the computer sees you in this moment, and it sees your choices, to give or not to give. The computer can reach into the future and see. If you give, things will be made better, substantially better, in fact, and not just for the child at your own expense, not even just for the child in you, aglow with the warmth of generosity and human fellowship. The computer sees a cascade effect. First, the child will be encouraged, enriched. Maybe this won't be the $10 that heals her, but it will go towards making her life better in an undeniable way. You, on the other hand, can lose the $10. It will not diminish the trajectory of your life. Indeed, you won't only feel the glow of generosity for a day or for a week. This 10 will have a visible presence in the jar, which others will see. In fact, the person waiting just behind will give, chagrined at their own impatience, forgiving you for taking so long. You, meanwhile, will have stepped to the side to text your brother before leaving, and once the other customer is gone, the waitress flashes you a warming smile. She's a very cute waitress. That brightens your day more than any $10 in the jar of any grinning, nameless, frail child. That's a reason to come back next week, and when you do, the waitress makes some tiny gesture. Maybe she gives you extra guacamole, maybe an extra scoop of one of those little Mexican candies. What started as a tiny walnut-sized snowball has now grown. The vault of your imagination dances with scenarios, imaginings of gifts ungiven. It no longer matters whether the child needed those $10. Your life has been made more meaningful. You realize how many people you pass who have quite lovely smiles, how many waitresses you just ignore. Perhaps you were a timid person, certainly an overthinker, but now the entire community sees that 10 in there and they give. The jar fills up twice as fast, and then when you give a 20, 3 times as fast as that. What is going on? What is this zeal that you feel for life? Abruptly, the margins of your day seem full of possibility. Each spare minute is a minute you can research something, fill out an extra form, reach up to that tiny further handhold you've been needing in your work. All of this our divine computer sees, and it urges you to pay the money. Things will be better. It reports into your ear, and you hesitate. You feel the stiffness of the bill between your thumb and forefinger. You see again the waitress waiting, and the customer. You feel him staring at your back. You feel a rush of sheepish frustration with your own timidity. The entire while, the computer continues to calculate, although it's not really calculating because it's already infinitely aware of every single possibility for however long it stretches. It's not really calculating, it's just moving along its preordained path. If the world would have been better served, it could have stopped you from going to the restaurant at all this evening. It could have made you dream last night of laughing friends and swaying daffodils. It could have prescribed you a medication to overcome your timidity. Perhaps it could even have injected into your biochemistry directly, a spike of confidence to change your fate. Okay, now we're getting into truly wild territory. I'll cover this more probably in some of my futurism series aimed at exploring the wild possibilities I see on our horizon. For now, though, it's really just a question. The computer doesn't even need to be a real thing for us to explore this. If we had the perspective of such a computer, we'd know the world will be made better in giving, so we'd know that we should give. But then there comes another range of possibilities, brought freshly into being. You're now aware of the feeling of giving, and the meagerness of your overall generosity, and the great gulf of suffering in the world. You drive home tormented, realizing that $10 could have gone to something 100, perhaps 1,000 times more efficient. Hey, if you've made it this far, I have a couple questions/comments. First of all, thank you. Thank you for your support. Please do consider subscribing, all that stuff, monetary stuff. I would love to do this full time, and it's a lot of work, and I love it. And always give me critiques, advice. I want to make this channel as good as possible, which leads me to, what about the style here? Using the stock footage versus just me talking, should I invest a lot more in editing? Editing just takes me, probably 85% of the time. It's the least fun thing, and it takes far and away the most time. So I'm trying to minimize editing. But is the stock footage kind of more engaging for the eye to follow? Or is the content such that most of you listening are just kind of listening as you do other things because you're focused on listening? And then would it be interesting if I were actually to just, stream as I'm reading through a lot of these works, as I'm taking notes, as I'm kind of outlining various thoughts? Is that something that's interesting at all? It would probably be obviously much more dry and slow. A lot of it would be probably me just speaking what I'm typing as I'm typing notes, or reading what I'm reading. Is that the sort of thing that should go on this channel? Should just be live streamed and then deleted forever? Should it be forgotten about because it's a terrible idea? What sort of things are you guys hoping for? You drive home tormented, realizing that $10 could have gone to something 100, perhaps 1,000 times more efficient. Sam Harris is on with Will McCaskill, and they're talking about malaria nets or CPAP machines that could save dozens of lives for almost no cost whatsoever. Suddenly you start to feel a crawling dread. There are people dying all across the world. Dying! And you're going out to eat? And you're living in a 2-bedroom house alone, and you're giving money to one girl just because she's local? She lives in a first world country. Surely she's more likely to get the donations she needs. Surely your money could be better spent elsewhere. But our cosmic supercomputer has decided it was indeed best for you to give the way you did. Why? Now the next time you go in, you must decide. You have another bill. A 20 this time. 20 for a girl in your town just because she's smiling and emaciated and the cute waitress is smiling at you across the counter. Or 20 for however many malaria nets that you know will go to someone who would otherwise not get them. What to choose? Here it seems like we must turn to something deeper. Why is giving better? Is it better because of how it helps the girl, a net good for sentience in the universe? We'll call that SITU for this video. SITU, sentience in the universe. Is it better because it also helps you, leads you down a path of more perspective and communal wholeness and all such other ripple effects, causing a net good for sentience in the universe? Is it better not because of some calculation, but because of some overarching essence of generosity and humanity, because giving is good and some spirit of being is made better for it? No. Okay, that's going the deontological route. That's not what we wanted for this video. We're utilitarians for this video, remember. We're quantifying sentient well-being, a very clear-cut task. So, that's it, isn't it? The computer calculated, and giving resulted in more quantitative well-being, so that's why giving was better, right? If it had been completely unintentional, if you had tripped and accidentally thrown $10 into the jar without even being aware of it, could have been better as well. It could have been better if the ceiling caved in and a gold coin from the top fell into the jar. It could have been better if you had gotten in a car accident, never gone to the restaurant, never disappointed the waitress, never frustrated the customer, never heard of the girl. So is there morality? Are there moral choices in this world? What if the computer couldn't calculate? What if you chose to give not knowing any of those things? Where would we say was the morality in the action? From the computer's perspective, there's no weight attached to this specific pattern or the connections between things in any broader sense. The computer has no need to notice a pattern of something like the good or generosity or even morality, because it notices everything, the end result of everything. It encompasses all of this quote-unquote pattern that the computer's coded to pursue is simply maximal well-being in all these particles that ever exist and move and interact. Minimal suffering, whatever that means. It's not a pattern, it's a quantity, a presence, a maximal number of ones, in a row, and a minimal number of zeros, say, across a maximal number of beings, to whatever degree can be attained. So even if that's what we're pursuing, as full utilitarians, how we calculate in our finitude is very different than how the computer calculates. The way we describe our calculations is very different. We say, okay, our brains are patterned this way. To experience getting the leg chopped off as bad and getting just a toe chopped off to be a bit better and getting nothing chopped off to be better, and then not living in fear of getting things chopped off to be even better, and then knowing where food can be found to be better, and then eating the food, cooking it well, giving it to a prospective mate, getting accepted, making sweet love, having children, tribe, future, legacy, blah, 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 blah. Till at some point, there's a huge society, much bigger than a tribe, but we still feel empathy for this smiling girl on the jar, and we give. And because of how our brains are structured, all those neurons fire, and we feel good. And if enough people do this, society does this. If enough societies do this, civilization changes on a massive level. This sounds kind of simple, right? Just lots of good things. Giving, family, sweet lovemaking, future, woohoo. We sort of tell ourselves these things are good, sort of in a vacuum, but then it turns out in reality there are conflicting things. Generosity means giving something away, and you can't just give to everybody. You can't just give to psychopaths, or we'd all be psychopaths, or we'd all be dead. We would have gone extinct. And you can't give to everybody until you die, because then you'll stop giving, and not if you have children, because then households wouldn't be stable. You need to select your children to give to. We wouldn't have kin groups otherwise. We wouldn't have personal relationships. We wouldn't trust one another. We would lack this expanding circle of fellowship that is sort of the human thing. We would be an entirely different sort of species, like some hyperfungus or beehive where the queen is just collective humanity and the worker bees feel no suffering. We would not have evolved to suffer on such an individual level, to bond on such an individual level, to collapse the action paths available into some digestible, immediate array that can be analyzed on an individual basis based on individual experience. So there are so many possible ways to be generous, all contradicting one another. There are so many possible ways to love, to fear, to have enemies or friends. For example, it's kind of wise to fear going into the Alaskan wilderness alone when you've never done it before. But it's often less useful to fear speaking to your partner about a matter that's grating on your soul. So what we do is we distill complexity down into these ideas: generosity, love, fear. And they're sort of nodes on the way to feelings, actions, that bring about this well-being that we want, that our supercomputer would be coded for. So we take these words, generosity, love, fear, and we try to negotiate with reality. We act in the ways our parents tell us to, our society tells us to, our own brain tells us to. We stumble, triumph, learn, but also adapt. With a changing environment, we need changing traits. And we get an idea as to when what we call love, say, tips into obsessiveness or neediness, or when fear tips into common sense, or when generosity becomes impossible. This is sort of how we see this world, and we do methodize it, certainly. We study the brain and childhood trauma and career paths and the justice system, and we get things like, oh, if you input discipline and hard work, it helps, but it doesn't help infinitely or automatically help, because you can also be dominated by your circumstances to a frustrating degree, and the people dying of the Black Death simply had no mechanism by which to heal themselves, to know how, so they just had to cart their bodies, wall off their houses, pray to their god, dance their rituals, and hope. So we kind of methodize as we can, and yes, as we make progress, as we learn the scientific method, we methodize better. We get a better sense of the causal chain of things and of the fact that there is a causal chain. This is kind of new. Pure science, particle physics, rigor, utilitarianism. Whatever we can possibly want, the utilitarian says, it must be framed in terms of the conscious experience. Sentience, let's say, for now, just because that's the one I was using earlier. We might gripe at the word happiness or hedonistic pleasure because we've learned those cannot be soul gods. They can lead us astray. They can give the sense of something superficial or misaligned, impermanent. But if misaligned, it's only because there's some greater possibility that awaits consciousness beyond. We call it a greater good, a deeper, more spiritual, more mature form of good, a more fellowship-y form of good. But why don't we just be honest with ourselves and for this conversation pick a word that slices through all the hubbub and the linguistic posturing? Why don't we just say well-being, happiness, bliss, dandruff? Call it whatever you like. Whatever it is, that's what we're trying to find. And it can only be conceived of, can only appear in, can only ever relate to the conscious landscape, the conscious experience of conscious beings. All the quibbles are not due to some difference in the deontological essence of certain values, but are due to confusion in terms of how we've arrived at those values and what sort of experience they would bring about. Islam isn't worse than Christianity because it's trying worse things, although the results might be that Muslims are trying worse things. Islam isn't trying anything. Christianity isn't trying anything. None of these things are things. There's no spirit of love or generosity. It's all simply a mechanism playing out, and we recognize parts of it and patterns of those things and give those patterns names because of our finitude. But this supercomputer has no need to recognize what is and isn't Islam, where love crosses into obsessiveness, which spirits of morality are truly best. This supercomputer recognizes no particular isolated entity, only the vast cascade of particles in motion and the conscious experience they produce. Any attempt to distinguish things in some intermediary way between single particle and the whole will be for the sake of communicating with us. So, how would this computer communicate a moral imperative? It would use concepts that appeal to us, to the structure of our finite brain. Again, I say, we quibble because of finitude, because of our perception, but this computer perceives all, and there's no need for quibbling. Love is better, the spirit of humanity. Truly, it is more difficult for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle than to enter the kingdom of heaven. This is what our supercomputer would do for our sake and our finitude, unless it really could just speak to you individually in every moment and tell you what you ought to do. Then, of course, the question would be, are you willing to do the action? How would the knowledge and that experience with the computer change your subjective experience? Would it just ruin ruin any sense of agency and therefore joy. If a computer tells you everything, you no longer feel you're a moral agent. No one feels that. The computer's telling you each and every step how best to move from greater finitude towards greater knowledge and capability, and how to use that capability for good. Love is no longer a true sacrifice, but simply always known to be better. Courage is not courage, but simply proper perspective. You see, the more we slide into the omniscience of the computer, the less a journey we seem to have, and the more a simple realization, a simple acting out of what we already see as best. The action is not good in and of itself, but only in what it brings about. Now, this sounds very unusual because we are humans, because we have these human brains, because we did evolve to empathize with the girl on the jar, the girl in our community that we can see in the little plastic jar on a favorite restaurant, with a cute waitress that we know, with customers waiting behind us, a sacrifice in a personal moment for a personal cause. And in broadening, in realizing the whole world, we earn a new perspective that lets us transcend this with the new sacrifice, giving up the tribal empathy and the local perspective for a more global one. Perhaps we have crazy new technologies. Perhaps we need to save the planet, guard against AI, embrace nuclear disarmament. With the changing environment comes a demand for changing perspective and changing values. But if we shared the computer's perspective, we would be a different sort of being. We would not have our human brains, our human ways of loving. We think of humans suffering on the other side of the world, and it feels somehow less real than the brother or the daughter or the animal suffering beside us. We think of humans dying in the past, and it feels less real than humans dying in the present, humans we can actually send money to. So there's a human population full of human brains that need malaria net donations instead of leukemia donations, because 1,000 malaria net lives can be saved for one leukemia life. Eesh, terrible decisions. And again, the computer is capable of considering them because it's a computer. It doesn't have a way of seeing the value of certain things beyond others. It's just math, those final endpoints, well-being and its antithesis, whatever. But we as humans cannot only make the malaria net decision in this way, because to ignore the leukemia patient rips us apart. Meaning the tribal empathy actually ultimately feeds back our inputs at some point into the maximal well-being in a more essential way, because it itself is one of our needs that needs to be fulfilled, because it's so tied to fellowship and blah, blah, blah. All those other things that we evolved for are the same thing as tribal empathy, so they actually become factors that you need to solve for as well, in tension with all these other factors. I think it was Peter Singer, maybe not. Someone had a thought experiment with babies. Imagine walking by a baby drowning in a puddle and passing it by because you could use the time or energy to save maybe 2 babies in Mozambique. Imagine this 1,000 times over, 1,000 omniscient computers whispering into 1,000 human ears. These would cease to be human ears. The human would be torn apart by this. I mean, we see some iteration of this already with a shift from hunter-gatherer to agrarian, and then all the way up here to mass urbanization, globalization, digital. Everyone passes a baby by, and we no longer trust our neighbors. We no longer see ourselves as motherly, as nurturing, as good. There's the classic example of the surgeon and the organs. A surgeon has you on his table, sees your 5 fully healthy organs, and knows he could save 5 other lives in killing you and harvesting them. Imagine a world in which this happened. Hospitals would not exist. No cooperation would exist. Now you could say, hold on though, we're adopting a utilitarian view. If everyone adopts a utilitarian view to the degree we understand it and we act it out, we all willingly lay down our organs to become the organs of 5 others. Again, this is where I understand the philosophers who answer these surveys with this scenario is implausible or impossible or not enough information. Those answers can seem strange sometimes. If it's just kill, don't kill, or trolley lever, not trolley lever dichotomy. But this scenario is so far from what we are. It's another sort of civilization, another sort of psychology. This is where you get the various sort of utilitarians. Should we all adhere to rules and break them only in fringe moments when it benefits us but does not ripple out to fracture society? Should we never break rules? Are rules of no weight on their own? In a somewhat Wittgensteinian way, I might suggest these are all just different ways of describing what we're really after, which depends on our psychology, and as long as we study and agree on the terms and discuss and methodize and test, we should head in the right direction. But I think it requires honesty about what we're truly about, what we must be about. To quote John Stuart Mill, "It is truly a whimsical supposition that, if mankind were agreed in considering utility to be the test of morality, they would remain without any agreement as to what is useful, and would take no measures for having their notions on the subject taught to the young and enforced by law and opinion. There's no difficulty in proving any ethical statement whatever to work ill, if we suppose universal idiocy to be conjoined with it. But on any hypothesis short of that, mankind must by this time have acquired positive beliefs as to the effects of some actions on their happiness, and the beliefs which have thus come down are the rules of morality for the multitude, and for the philosopher until he has succeeded in finding something better. To inform a traveler respecting the place of his ultimate destination is not to forbid the use of landmarks and direction posts on the way. The proposition that happiness is the end aim of morality does not mean that no road ought to be laid down to that goal, or that persons going thither should not be advised to take one direction rather than another. Men really ought to leave off talking a kind of nonsense on this subject, which they would neither talk nor listen to on other matters of practical concernment. Whatever we adopt as the fundamental principle of morality, we require subordinate principles to apply it by. The impossibility of doing without them, being common to all systems, can afford no argument against any one in particular, but gravely to argue as if no such secondary principles could be had, and as if mankind had remained till now and always must remain, without drawing any general conclusions from the experience of human life, is as high a pitch, I think, as absurdity has ever reached in philosophical controversy. The truth is, we create all of this, and the finitude is a part of that, and the rules or abstractions or spirits that allow us to function in that finitude are a part of it as well. And we are creating it all the time in this dialogue between what is known and unknown, what is rule and what is breaking. And without that finitude, and without that dialogue, we are not humans. We are distilling down, we're extracting out some overarching spirit, something to bind beyond the punch of impulse and the empathy of tribe and the empathy of city-state and kingdom, empire, religion, race. We're seeking to make some rule absolute and overarching, so it can be claimed like love, freedom, human rights. But these manifest here to us in our finitude as rules or deontologies. But where we understand, where we can methodize, they slide sort of helplessly ultimately into consequentialism, utilitarianism. So we test and prod at the deontology until it dies, just as we test and prod at the sacred or the dogma until it dies. It serves until it doesn't. Okay, this video was not finished on time. I'm struggling with consistency, and I told myself it's the only way I can grow, that I'm going to start uploading every week, and this video is not ready. I'm still going through old notes. I'm still trying to consolidate thoughts on John Stuart Mill and whatnot, mixing with new thoughts. And, I'm trying to add something of substance of my own. I have all my own language game and stuff, and then you read all the philosophers, and it's like, okay, they're just talking about it in this different way. And that's actually one of my points, is I think a lot of our confusion or a lot of our discussion is really just confusion about language, or the way we experience filtered through the words, the tools we use to try to capture certain sorts of meaning and relate that sort of meaning to this sort of meaning. And I think that that's a very individual human process. That's how we integrate truth with our personal embodied finite experience here on this world. So it's actually a necessary process. It doesn't, maybe confusion isn't the right word, but there's a lot of substance that language fails to capture. So that was one of the focuses, which is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. But then also just the general supercomputer example is a way I like to think about morality. And I mean, it's not a new idea. It's called ideal observer, and I think, and you can imagine it like a god, a supercomputer, whatever sort of thing. But it's this idea that what are we truly going for if we take an objective view in terms of sentience or beings that hold value in their minds and experience in the universe? What sorts of things are they going to be pursuing? And how can we really frame that here with our finitude, which is at that point at which it becomes some kind of distilled meme or guess type of essence thing that we hold up as a supposed value separate from somehow happiness or well-being or any one isolated distinct idea. If that makes sense.